The empty town that echoes with secrets. The vanishing. The moon hung low and heavy, a pale, ghostly eye that cast shadows long enough to swallow whole forests. In a far-off corner of the American wilderness, beyond the reach of most maps, there lay a town that time had forgotten, Almer Hollow. Nestled between towering cliffs and dark woods, it was a place where the whispers of the past echoed like an old tune lost in the wind. The only way to find it was to wander far off the beaten paths, following the hollowed-out trees that marked the way, if you knew what to look for. For years, the town had been abandoned. No more laughter, no more voices calling out over the sound of children at play. There were stories, of course, of a tragedy, of how the town was once full of life before it emptied overnight. Some said it was a disease that took the people, others whispered of a curse that had lingered long before the town was built. No one really knew and no one dared to ask. But deep in the woods, where the silence felt almost too thick to breathe, the town's echoes still lingered. Old folk who lived nearby would shake their heads when asked about Almer Hollow, muttering under their breath about the whispering wind, and how it carried the voices of the past. They would tell you not to venture too close to the hollow, and that there was something strange in the air. A feeling that you were being watched, that you were never truly alone. But it was a bright summer afternoon when young Noah walked into Almer Hollow for the first time, his heart beating in his chest like a drum. He had heard the stories since he was a child, stories told around campfires and passed down through generations. His curiosity had led him to the edge of the woods, and it was there that he found the path, the one that twisted and turned through the trees like a snake slithering through the underbrush. He had been told not to go, but he had heard the rumors of treasure, of hidden gold buried somewhere in the town's forgotten streets. Noah wasn't one for believing in ghost stories, but the idea of finding something lost to time, something untouched by the years, was too tempting to ignore. As he stepped deeper into the woods, the trees began to close in around him, their limbs stretching out like long fingers reaching toward the sky. The silence in the air was oppressive, as though the woods themselves were holding their breath, watching him with unseen eyes. A shiver ran down his spine, but Noah pressed on, his boots crunching against the leaves beneath him. The town wasn't far now. He could feel it, the pull of it, like a whisper in the air that urged him forward. The path grew steeper, the trees thicker, and the world around him seemed to grow quieter, as though the very earth was holding its secrets close to its chest. And then, as the last of the sunlight faded into twilight, Noah stumbled into the town. Almer Hollow was unlike anything he had expected. The houses, long abandoned, were little more than skeletons, their walls cracked and their windows broken. Ivy crept up the sides of the buildings, and trees grew through the streets like an invasive force, reclaiming what was once theirs. Yet, despite the decay, there was something unnerving about the place. It felt alive. The air was thick with a strange tension, like the town itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. Noah wandered through the streets, his footsteps echoing louder than they should have. There was a strange stillness in the air, as if the town were frozen in time, caught in a moment that had never ended. The houses, though dilapidated, seemed to watch him. Their broken windows were like empty eyes, and the wind through the trees sounded like whispers from long ago. But there was something else. Something more. A faint sound, almost like the creaking of old floorboards, came from one of the houses. Noah's heart skipped a beat. He had to investigate. He moved cautiously toward the house, stepping lightly as though he were entering a sacred place. The door creaked open on its own as if inviting him inside. And inside there was only darkness. Yet, the faintest glimmer of light danced in the corner of the room, casting long shadows that twisted and swayed. As his eyes adjusted to the dim light, Noah saw them, faint shapes barely visible as though they were not quite there. Ghostly figures, blurred like old photographs, moved through the house in slow, deliberate motions. They did not acknowledge his presence, but they were unmistakable. People. People from another time, walking in the halls as if they had never left. Noah could hardly breathe as the figures moved through the walls, their forms flickering like candle flames in a breeze. He wanted to scream, to run, but something kept him rooted to the spot. One of the figures, a tall woman with a long dress, turned her head toward him. Her face was pale, gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to look right through him. Her lips moved, but no sound escaped. She raised a finger to her lips, a silent warning, and then vanished through the wall, leaving Noah alone in the dark, his mind racing. But as soon as she had disappeared, the whispering began again. Soft at first, like the wind through the trees, but then growing louder, closer, until it was all around him. The walls seemed to close in, and the air grew colder, carrying the voices of those who had long since vanished from the earth. Noah backed away slowly, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He needed to leave. But the house wasn't letting him go. The door was gone. The windows were gone. He was trapped. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening now, and the shadowy figures began to circle him, their movements jerky like puppets on a string. One by one they reached out to him, their cold fingers brushing against his skin, sending shocks of icy terror through his body. Then, just as he thought he could bear no more, the figures vanished. The whispers stopped. The room was empty once again. But Noah was not the same. His heart pounded in his chest, his limbs shaking as he stood in the eerie silence of the house. And then he heard it, soft, almost imperceptible, a voice not from the past but from the present. "You should not have come." The voice came from behind him. Noah spun around, but the room was empty. Suddenly the door creaked open once more. The path back out of the town was waiting for him. He didn't hesitate. He ran faster than he had ever run before, feeling the cold breath of the town on his neck. But as he crossed the threshold of the town's edge, he glanced back one last time. Almer Hollow stood silent once more, its empty streets stretching off into the woods, waiting, watching. And the whispers never stopped. The echoes of the past. The next morning, Noah awoke with a start. His heart still pounded from the dream, or was it a memory? The faintest touch of cold lingered on his skin, like the hands of those figures had left a mark. He could still hear their whispers, soft yet insistent, like the wind through the trees, threading its way into his thoughts. His breath was shallow, his head throbbing with the sensation of something unfinished, something he had left behind. It was no dream. He was sure of it. He had tried to shake the memory off, telling himself it was just the eerie atmosphere of Almer Hollow playing tricks on him. But he knew deep down that something far darker was at play. And it was not finished with him. He couldn't resist. His curiosity, now mingled with dread, led him back to the woods, the same path that wound through the trees, marking the way to the empty town. The legends, the whispers, all the signs pointed to one truth he couldn't ignore. Almer Hollow had secrets, and they were not done with him. As Noah walked back to the edge of the hollow, the day had turned overcast. The sun seemed far away, and the air was thick, heavy with the weight of an unseen presence. The wind picked up, rustling the trees and carrying with it the faint scent of something long forgotten. The woods were still, too still, as if they were holding their breath, waiting for him to step forward. The silence was unnerving, but Noah pressed on, ignoring the cold prickling at the back of his neck. It was in the same clearing that he had entered the town the night before, and as soon as he stepped into the forgotten streets of Almer Hollow, a chill washed over him. There was something different this time, something more alive in the air, as though the town itself were waiting for him to return. The houses were still standing, their walls decaying and windows shattered, but now they felt like silent witnesses to something ancient. The air was thick with their forgotten stories, whispers of long-dead souls that had once called this place home. The streets stretched out like veins, weaving through the town, leading to places that were best left untouched. He made his way to the house from the previous night, the one where he had first encountered the spirits. But as he stepped onto the creaking porch, he noticed something new. A faint glow, a pulsing light that emanated from the cracks in the door. It wasn't just the dim light of the room, this was something more. Something otherworldly. Noah pushed the door open, the old wood groaning in protest. The air inside was thick with dust, but there, in the center of the room, was an old wooden box. It sat on the floor, untouched, as though waiting for him. There was no mistaking it. The box was the source of the glow, faint but undeniable, as if something was trapped inside. His heart raced. Every part of him screamed to turn away, to leave, but the lure of mystery was too strong. He approached the box with trembling hands, his fingers brushing the edges. The box felt alive under his touch, pulsing like a heartbeat. And then, just as his fingers closed around the lid, the voice came again. "You should not have come." It was the same voice, the voice from behind him the night before, but this time it was louder, clearer. It carried the weight of a warning, of a curse that had been placed upon this town long ago. Noah yanked his hand away from the box, his body trembling. The room seemed to close in around him, the shadows deepening as if the very walls were watching him. The air grew thick with a sense of impending doom, and he realized then that the town itself had been waiting for him. Waiting for someone to uncover its secret. Suddenly the ground beneath his feet shifted. The house seemed to groan as if it were alive, and Noah stumbled backward, his mind spinning. The town was no longer still. It was shifting, moving, as though something beneath it was awakening. The whispers returned, louder than before. They weren't just from the wind anymore. They were voices, hundreds of voices, all speaking at once, overlapping and intertwining. They spoke in languages Noah couldn't understand, but the terror in their tone was unmistakable. Some were pleading, some were warning, others simply screamed in agony. The house began to shake, and Noah realized it was the heartbeat of the town itself, thumping beneath him. He ran for the door, but it slammed shut before he could reach it, the wood splintering as if something immense were pushing against it from the other side. The whispers grew louder. The room seemed to spin. And then he saw them, more figures. More of the ghostly inhabitants of Almer Hollow. They appeared one by one, emerging from the walls, from the shadows, their eyes hollow and their faces twisted with sorrow and regret. Some looked as though they had been crying for centuries. Others had eyes filled with rage, as though their souls had been trapped for far too long. One by one they reached out for him, their cold, lifeless hands brushing against his skin. Their touch burned like ice, sending waves of cold terror through his body. The woman he had seen the night before was there again, her face twisted in anguish as she reached out to him. And then she spoke. "It is too late," she whispered, her voice hollow and broken. "The curse cannot be undone." The ground shook beneath them, and Noah felt the weight of their words like a physical blow. He backed away, his legs weak, but the figures kept coming, surrounding him. Their eyes were all on him now, and they were hungry for something he didn't understand, something he had unwittingly unleashed. The light from the box flickered, growing brighter, more intense, until it filled the room. A blinding light that seemed to pulse in time with the whispers, in time with the heartbeat of the town. Noah tried to run, tried to escape, but the figures were closing in on him. The walls seemed to melt away, and the town itself was collapsing around him, folding in on itself. He ran out into the streets, but Almer Hollow was no longer the same town he had walked into. The houses were gone. The streets were twisted, distorted. The air was thick with shadows, and the town seemed to stretch on forever, an endless maze that refused to let him leave. And then as Noah looked back, he saw the final figure, a man tall and gaunt with eyes like black holes. He smiled a cold, empty smile, his lips parting to reveal sharp, jagged teeth. "You have awakened us," he said, his voice like a death rattle. "Now you will never leave." And with that, the town began to close in, its heart beating louder and louder, drowning out the sound of Noah's desperate screams. The whispers never stopped. The town's secret. Noah's screams were swallowed by the dense, suffocating air of Almer Hollow, as if the town itself had consumed them, absorbing every trace of his fear into its ancient bones. The shadows that surrounded him shifted with a mind of their own, weaving between the broken streets and collapsing buildings. Almer Hollow was alive, or perhaps it had always been, living, breathing, feeding on the fear and despair of those who dared to enter. He ran, or at least he tried to, his feet barely lifting off the ground as the town's dark energy tugged at him, pulling him back toward the heart of the place. The once empty streets now felt like veins, pulsing with an ancient, malevolent life that had been reawakened. The buildings, though decaying, seemed to bend toward him as though they had grown sentient, watching him, trapping him. The figure, the man with the black eyes, was always a step behind. Noah could hear his slow, deliberate footsteps echoing through the hollowed streets, growing louder and louder, like a heartbeat that wouldn't stop. The man's smile never wavered, his jagged teeth gleaming in the dim light. With each step he took, Noah could feel the air grow colder, the weight of inevitability pressing down on him like a mountain. "You cannot escape," the man whispered, his voice like the rustle of dead leaves. "Almer Hollow has claimed you now. It has claimed us all." Noah's breath came in sharp, ragged gasps, but the man's voice was calm, detached. "You were always meant to be here. Just as we were." The truth settled in Noah's stomach like a stone. He wasn't just running for his life, he was running to something. This town, these people, they had always been here. They hadn't vanished, they hadn't died. They had been trapped, locked away by the curse of the Hollow, forced to live through the passage of time in an endless loop, never able to escape. The man's figure grew clearer, more defined, his features taking on an unsettling familiarity. And then, as though he were reading Noah's thoughts, the man spoke again. "Almer Hollow does not allow its secrets to be uncovered. Once you step inside, it becomes a part of you, just as it became a part of us. We were the first to arrive, some lost, some seeking, all of us bound by the curse that had already taken hold of this place." The man paused, watching Noah's every move with cold, calculating eyes. "And you, like the others, will become one of us. You will remain here forever." Noah stopped running, his mind reeling as the weight of the man's words sank in. This wasn't a place of forgotten ghosts. It was a place where time folded in on itself, where the souls of the lost were kept captive, trapped in an endless cycle. They had never left. They had never been allowed to leave. The air around Noah thickened and the whispers grew louder. They were everywhere, surrounding him with voices both familiar and strange. Some were pleading for release, others crying for help, and still more whispered warnings of the same fate Noah was about to suffer. The shadows lengthened, twisting like fingers that reached out to grab him, to drag him down into the town's depths. And then with a sudden jolt, Noah's vision blurred. The ground seemed to open beneath him and he was falling through the blackness, through the very soul of Almer Hollow. He landed hard on cold stone, the air thick and musty, and when his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he saw the truth. The heart of Almer Hollow was not a town at all. It was a massive cavern, an underground labyrinth that stretched far beneath the earth. The walls were covered in strange ancient markings, symbols that glowed faintly with an eerie light. And in the center of it all stood the well, a well that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. It was the source of the town's curse, the very thing that had kept Almer Hollow alive, feeding on the souls of the lost, keeping them trapped in a prison of time. Noah could feel the pull of it like a magnetic force drawing him toward it. The man with the hollow eyes was behind him now, standing at the edge of the cavern, watching silently. "It's not too late," the man said, his voice low and soft, almost sympathetic. "You can join us. Become part of the town. Forget the world above, forget what you knew. You can be one of us forever." Noah's heart raced. He wasn't sure if he was more terrified of the man's offer or of the well itself. It seemed to beckon him as though the very earth was calling him to surrender. But then, as if answering his unspoken prayer, Noah turned. With all the strength he could muster, he pushed himself away from the well, away from the terrible pull that threatened to drown him in its depths. His legs were weak, his body battered and bruised, but he stumbled toward the cavern's exit, toward the faint light that beckoned from beyond the shadows. The man did not follow. He stood, watching as Noah struggled to escape. The whispers grew louder, their voices now a chorus of torment and grief. "You cannot escape the town," they cried. "You cannot escape the curse. It will claim you just as it has claimed us." Noah reached the exit, where the cavern narrowed to a thin passageway. It was his only hope. He squeezed through, his chest tight, his breath shallow, but the whispers followed him, filling the narrow passage with an overwhelming presence. He couldn't let them pull him back. He couldn't let the town swallow him whole. With every step, he felt the weight of Almer Hollow's curse pressing down on him, the walls seeming to close in on him, the air growing colder and colder. And yet, with each step he grew closer to the light, closer to freedom. Finally, just as the last of the shadows seemed to reach for him, Noah broke through. He emerged into the woods, the town's grip loosening, but the whispers still echoed in his ears. He had escaped for now. But he knew, deep in his heart, that Almer Hollow was not done with him. No one who entered the hollow ever truly left. And though the town would be waiting, silent for now, it would never forget. The mystery of Almer Hollow would linger, always, its whispers carried on the wind, reaching out to those who would listen, to those who dared to uncover its secrets. And somewhere in the depths of the hollow, the well waited, hungry for more. The curse of Almer Hollow, it seemed, was eternal,